And Trina, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Shanda. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad that you could join us for this very important topic with our presenter, Jen Marr, today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jen and just a little bit what I learned from her thus far, just interacting. So Jen Marr is the founder and CEO of Inspiring Comfort. And she's also the author of the book, Pause to Comfort, an everyday guide to learn how you can help men out of this connected world. And Jen will explain to you why the book, I think I've already learned from her why the book is called Pause to Comfort. Jen is passionate about the science of human care. And just from talking to her about what has occurred within the last year, I know she is very, very passionate about this topic. So I'm not going to hold Jen up. I'm going to turn it over to her. Without further ado, I want to introduce some of you all to Jen Marr. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Trina, and thank you, Shanda. It is really a pleasure to be here. One of the downsides of our new world is that I can't see you all in person, but I wish I could be seeing all your smiling faces back at me, but it is a pleasure to be here and a real pleasure to be talking to people that are out in the workforce dealing with a lot of change and a lot of hurt out there. I don't think there's anyone on you or your team that has not suffered enormous change and uncertainty over these past 18 months. So we're going to tackle today what that means. And I am going to start by sharing my screen. And the way this is going to work, this is mostly a webinar. As Shanda said, there are going to be a couple points that I might ask you to give some feedback as to your own behaviors of care. Don't feel pressured to at all. This is always something we can follow up on, but would love to hear from you after or during if you want to do that. This is all about helping us understand how we can create more connectedness in our workplaces today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and a story. Okay. You know, it was a day almost like today. It was sunny. It was a bit colder. I didn't know if I could run 26.2 miles, but I had signed up to run the Boston Marathon with a friend for charity. And that's just what we were going to do on this day. If any of you are runners, which I was a new runner, had never run a marathon before, but this particular marathon, the Boston Marathon, you take a bus from downtown Boston, 26 miles out to Hopkinton, Massachusetts, to start the race. And what you do is you get on school buses and you drive out to the staging area where they start the race. And I just want to tell you, there is honestly nothing weirder than being in a bus realizing you are going to have to run all the way back that you're driving on this bus, and the bus ride was 45 minutes. And Amy and I looked at each other like, what have we just signed up to do? That it was a beautiful day. And the thing about the Boston race is you kind of start at a higher elevation and it goes down to sea level. So it's a lot of downhill running. And in the beginning, it was sunny. And the greatest thing about the Boston Marathon is that it's a holiday for the area. I'm not sure if it's all of Massachusetts, but definitely Boston and the suburbs have off the day for Patriots Day. And so they line the run like it's a parade. So as we're running this race, we were watching as kids would hand out licorice or oranges, and adults would be high-fiving you with their beers. And honestly, it was the first half of it was just fun. But about mile 18, the hills start. And what happens if you're not like a real seasoned runner is you can tend to go out fast and, because it's downhill and you're having fun. And then all of a sudden, miles 16, 17 hit and you are exhausted. And then the hills start. I don't know if you've heard of Heartbreak Hill. It is just that, because you're running up this hill when you feel like you hardly have any energy left. Anyway, so we got through Heartbreak Hill and my family had met me there. And that was just incredible to see my family at Heartbreak Hill. And then a couple more hills. And then somebody had told me fun at 21, because that's where Boston College is. And so these students had been out early, having lots of fun. And it was really a fun stretch to run through Boston College. But then mile 22 hit, mile 23, mile 24, and you're just exhausted. And I remember putting my headphones in after hitting mile 25. And I knew I just needed to go up a few blocks, over a few blocks, over a few blocks again, and the finish line. I could picture it in my mind. My head was down. I had my headphones in, literally just counting my steps to finish this race. And all of a sudden there was a man standing in front of me. And the man had his arms held up and he said, "Stop, the race is over." And I'm like, what? How is the race over? And he said, "There are bombs at the finish line." And, when you've run that long, it was going on 4 hours of running now, and your mind is kind of just playing tricks on you. And I look at my friend Amy and we're kind of snapped to it. And we realize there's people screaming around us, going all over the place. And Amy wanted to keep walking towards the finish line. And I said, "No, we can't do that." And so we spent 2 more hours and 3 more miles of wandering the streets of Boston with helicopters overhead, sirens everywhere, police yelling at us not to go somewhere. We knew we had to get back to the hotel. And if you stop running after 25 miles, typically they give you kind of a blanket, a wrap, they give you food to get nutrients back in you. And we were just out on the streets and it was cold. It was like 55 degrees and you were sweaty. And so you just start shaking, and we were wandering, and I was so grateful. I was with my friend Amy. This man just out of the blue gave me his coat. Another person gave me a sandwich. I finally found my family after 2 hours. And I want to tell you, those 2 hours and those 3 miles, when we got back to the hotel, my watch actually said 29 miles. It was far more than a marathon that day. And the thing was, I was running Boston as a way to heal. At the same time, I was helping in the recovery efforts at Sandy Hook Elementary after that tragic shooting. I was going in there every week. And it was a way to heal, to prepare for this race. And so having 2 tragedies so close to me within a matter of 3 months, like Sandy Hook Elementary had happened in December of 2012, and the Boston Marathon bombing was April of 2013. And it took me a very long time to process all of that. But the thing that I learned is it was in those last 3 miles, those last 2 hours, that I came to learn that is what life is all about. It wasn't about getting through this alone. I had my friend next to me. I had people that came and met me at my house after. I had hundreds of people texting me. My family was there. The coat that was given me. Friends, we can't do life alone. And we're living in a very lonely, hurting world. And that 2-3 miles is what started my journey. It was being involved in so much tragedy at once and understanding that we're living in a world that more and more doesn't know how to react to tragedy. But yet that's exactly what we need, is we need each other. And so why are we here today talking about comfort? Why are we here talking about care in our workplaces? This is not something we used to talk about ever. But our world has changed and we have changed. And we are in a situation now where leaders of tomorrow are going to have to understand, to know how to care for those people. Like you might be watching the Great Resignation and the Big Quit, whatever you want to call it. And if you look at the data behind it, employees are not feeling valued. And what does it mean to not feel value? It means they're not feeling seen, they're not feeling heard, they're not feeling understood. And so it is a whole new skill that we have to be able to have in our workplaces now to show care when it can be awkward. You know, I'm going to put a phrase up that if you do remember just one thing today, I think this is one of the biggest phrases that is so critical to remember. And that is, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And this holds so true in the workplace. You know, it used to be that we would mostly bring our brains to work and we would use our brains to do our jobs. But, you know, AI is going to take over a lot of brain stuff in the future. But AI can't touch our hearts. And the more stressful our world becomes, the more our hearts are critical to be able to show not only outside of the workplace, but in the workplace. You know, so I don't know if any of you saw it in Forbes, I think it was last week or the week before, there was an article. It says, what is the #1 leadership skill that leaders need to know now? And it is empathy. But I want to challenge this further because this is what I've been doing for the last 7 years. Empathy is not a skill. Empathy is an emotion. And some of the issues out there is that we can feel like we want to do something, but we just don't know what to say and do. So we're stopped. So to be a good, compassionate leader, you have to be able to put that care into action. And so we need a skill for that. An emotion is not a skill. An emotion is not a verb. We need a verb. So what verb are we going to look at? We're going to look at comfort. Now, whoever invented the word comfort, and I want you to think about it, I'm going to challenge you on this. You're probably used to comfort, thinking it's just a state of being. It's comfortable. You have a cozy socks or a nice blanket. But comfort, think about this. Whoever invented this word, COM, that's the core for community, right? Means together with, and fort means strength. Whoever invented this word invented it to work through challenges together. To feel comforted and to comfort is anything but easy. It's anything but comfortable. You have to step outside of your comfort zone to comfort. So let's be very clear here when we're talking about comfort. This is not the lazy, inactive noun that we are talking about. We are talking about the powerful, resilient verb of an action to know how to care for someone when they're struggling. Okay, very, very different. If you actually look at Merriam-Webster definition of the word, you see there is a noun and a verb form. And the noun form is a feeling, state of well-being, and that's great. But the verb, look at that, to give strength and hope. That's what that's what's needed right now out in our world. And that's what leaders need to be able to do. So why is teaching this skill so critical today? You know, John Maxwell is one of the greatest leadership experts out there. And he will say that the #1 question on the minds of employees, and you probably think about it for your boss, the #1 question in their minds is, do you even care about me? Do you care for me? And someone in the workplace that doesn't feel cared and connected to, well, you're seeing it with the Big Quit, but they're not going to be dedicated to their colleagues and their manager. They're not going to be loyal to the organization. They're never going to exceed expectations, maybe meeting them, but they're going to have difficulty meeting them. And they will most likely operate below expectations, right? They may cause conflict and divisiveness if they don't feel understood and seen and heard. Because at the end of the day, hurting people hurt people, right? It's very true. And a manager will spend a lot of time putting out fires. So where do we go? Let's first of all, we need to know where we are right now to map out where you want to go. And this is a big thing that I think is so critical in order to learn how to care and to show care. You have to know the data with what is going on underneath all of this right now. We have been doing surveys and assessments for all of our programming. And at the point of aggregating all of our data right now, 64% of people that have answered our surveys and done our assessments say they're struggling with anxiety and depression. 64%. I've worked with groups as high as 73%. Student bodies, our college students, are hovering right around 65%. That is huge, that they have been dealing with anxiety and depression over this past year. 50% of people over the past year have been dealing with deep senses of uncertainty, financial struggles, physical struggles, and family struggles. There have been some workplaces that I've dealt with that almost 40% of employees that come into work don't feel cared for outside of work. Think about that. Let that sink in. So we're in a world right now where we're struggling. There's no question about it. So let's talk about what people rate themselves highly on. So the number one care behavior, and this cuts across every single demographic. It doesn't matter if you are a student or a manager or a leader or a stay-at-home mom. The number one care behavior people say they are good at is they rate themselves highly in being able to see people that are struggling. And that's great. It's great to know if people are struggling. Now let's flip that and we ask, what is the number one area you feel uncared for? And this is through our anonymous surveys. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a student, faculty member, manager, leader, parent. The number one area people feel uncared for is they don't feel seen when they struggle. Think about that. I can see you when you struggle. No one sees me when I struggle. This is the challenge we're facing right now. And this is what we call the empathy action gap, where we have seen that 75% of people will say, I can recognize when someone's struggling, but yet only 15%, sometimes as high as 25, but the highest group I've worked with is 25%, will say they feel equipped to know what to say and do when someone is struggling. And that is why we're here. And this is what I'm dedicated to mending, because we can teach people what to say and do to show care, and we have to. But let's think about, first of all, how did this happen and why are we here? It's really critically important to know that things have changed. There's a reason why we have to do all this. And let's walk through that. And I think it's going to be pretty intuitive. You know, when I was writing my book, I had a conversation with my mom. And my mom grew up in rural Iowa. And she was living in this town, Reedland, Iowa, in the middle of nowhere. And she told me this, and again, this is only a generation above me, but when she was growing up and a barn burned down, they instinctively knew, intuitively, they just knew it, all of the people in all of the surrounding towns would find their way to that farm. No questions asked, no phone calls made. They made their way to that farm because there wasn't even building insurance back then. And these families needed each other just to live. So she talked to me about how they would divide up the tasks, and some would take the burnt wood away. Others would keep the livestock. Others would chip in financially. Others would make the food for the family. Understanding that this farm is their livelihood, they did whatever it took to get this family back on their feet. They all chipped in to buy the wood, and they all chipped in to rebuild the barn. Think about that. That is my mom's generation. How quickly we have moved. Can you imagine right now asking someone, hey, you want to go help rebuild a barn, but we're all needed over at that fire? People would say, no, you have building insurance for that. And so it's amazing how quickly things have changed in our world. So I want you just to close your eyes and think about this for a second. We could talk for days about deciding when humanity started, but let's, for the sake of just this discussion today, let's talk about the beginning of recorded history. So the beginning of recorded history would be 5,000 years ago. So for 4,900 of those years, life was basically the same. we lived in family tribes. We stayed with our family, we cared for our family, we would look for doctors if someone got sick, we would usually take over the family business. It wasn't until 1900 that things really started to change. Think about it, telephones, cars, air travel started, commercial air travel started in 1970, that changed a lot. First assisted living home, 1981, think about that. Our lives have changed so quickly between the Industrial Revolution, the technological revolution, the healthcare revolution, but nothing has changed more than the way in which we communicate. Now, I'm not here to talk about how bad phones are because we're living with them and they will never change. What we want to consider today is the impact our screens are having on our lives. And why does that have to do with comfort, which is why we're talking about caring in the workplace? Has a lot to do with it. You know, I want you to think back to if you're growing up, if you're a communications major or took anything to do with communications, you would have learned that like 93% of communication is nonverbal. It's only 7% of communication are the words. So it is, how fast am I talking? Am I nervous, or am I really sad and down and not looking at you, or am I fidgety? There's so much that goes into the way we communicate. And when we are texting someone, everything goes away, but that's 7%. So we have to think of the impact we're having. These pictures here used to be places where people talked, right? That bottom left-hand corner, remember those awkward moments when you didn't have a phone and you'd have to like do chit chat, small talk about the family until the meeting started? That's gone. Now we absorb ourselves in the phone. Our students, our families, all of us, we are on our screens all the time. So what is happening with that is we are losing the art of being present. We are losing the art of being present, and our human care skills are becoming more and more underdeveloped because we're not watching people as clearly. We're rating ourselves very highly that we can tell when they're struggling, but yet we're not seeing the whole picture. We might be reading the situation wrong. And so we're not quite sure how to react. Again, I can see when someone's struggling. No one sees me when I'm struggling. Therefore, I'm going to quit my job. Think about this. Think about an iceberg. You know, most of us now see our friends and family online. We see that little tip of the iceberg, right? I know my daughters, I have 3 daughters. They put filters on their images. They do everything, you know, to make them look as good as they can, Snapchat filters and all that. But yet our youth and even our adults are feeling very alone right now. In 2018, Cigna did a study to 20,000 adults. It's not a small survey. 54% of adults said they don't have anyone that knows them very well. Think about that, 54%. And why is this happening? Again, because we're only choosing to share certain parts of our life with the majority of people. We're hiding a lot because we're not conversing as much. And so again, we're feeling unseen and uncared for. And so what I want us to consider today, when we hear about the loneliness epidemic, when we hear about isolation, loneliness is not about being alone. I mean, I know during COVID, we were, you know, isolated, and definitely that did not help. But you can be on a college campus with tens of thousands of kids, and a very high percentage of those kids feel lonely. It's not about being alone. It's feeling uncared for. Again, not being seen. Nobody's seen what I'm going through. So when we're talking about caring and loneliness, we are talking about the absolute urgency to show people that we care. Because I guarantee you, we could ask anybody on this call today what they've dealt with these last 18 months, and boy, are we going to hear a lot. Every single one of us. I was talking to Trina and Chanda yesterday. We all have stories for these last 18 months. So everyone in your care at work or at home is dealing with something. And you want to be cared for, and so do they. But yet we're facing this situation where so many of us feel alone. And so how are we tackling this? You know, Dr. Arthur Evans, who runs the American Psychological Association, says the number one way to deal with these last, 18 months, 2 years, whatever, and ongoing, it's not just going away tomorrow. He will say the number one area is social connectedness, not professional connectedness, social connectedness. And basically saying there are hundreds of studies that go back decades that will show that the amount of social support you have, and again, what is that? It's people that care for you. It's your tribe. The amount of social support you have is directly related to your physical health, your mental health, and generally how we do in life. All right, so critical. And why is this? Because there's an interplay between our hormones. Now, after I ran that Boston race, it took me days. My mind was foggy. I was not thinking clearly because my system was dumped with cortisol from all the stress of that. And the one thing, when we have these stresses upon stresses right now, the one thing that overpowers cortisol is oxytocin, and that is our human relationship hormone. That is why Dr. Arthur Evans said social connectedness is so critical. We need people to care for us. Now, there's this researcher from Stanford University. Her name is Dr. Kelly McGonigal. And she gave one of the top TED Talks. It was, I think, like number 19, if you look it up. And she talks about this. Our bodies are actually triggered to find people when we're struggling. Our bodies will actually release oxytocin to go find someone to connect with. And how this plays out is if you've ever been struggling with something and you say, I have to get this off my chest. I have to talk to somebody about this. I'm just going to burst if I have to keep this in any longer. That is oxytocin triggering you for connection. That is how our human body is wired. And if you think about that, might that not be the bottom line of our mental health epidemic right now? People feeling they need that connection, they need that care, but they're not getting it. That, I think, is something that is absolutely going on right now. And what happens when our bodies are full of cortisol? We are emotionally exhausted and we are under stress. And when our bodies are emotionally exhausted and under stress, look at these two things: backing out of relationships and feeling isolated, backing out of the thing that you need the most and feeling isolated, which is why it is even more critical to show care. These last years, we've been working with Dr. David DeSteno, who is the lead psychologist at Northeastern University. And he says it this way: when our bodies endure long-term stress, the wiring to offset the stress, again, those two hormones, is found in human relationships and connection. We need that to feel safe, to cope with stress, and to manage fear. Because again, that goes right along with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or however you want to look at it. We need safety, belonging, trust, community, relationships, and engagement. And at the heart of it, people are insecure and hurting. And so we have to find ways. We can't get through these needs alone. We can't self-care our way through that. And so let's go back to comfort. Why are we talking about comfort versus empathy or compassion? When I was out in the field, and I spent 5 years very deep in crisis response work, and I would be helping communities rebuild, and there would be programs out in the field that weren't working, which is why we needed to do more. People cared, but they didn't know how to show it. How does that happen? Let me give you 2 examples. A lot of schools did random acts of kindness program, right? Again, kindness programs, so critical and needed. But when you do a random act, it doesn't result in a connection. So people do things that are nice. A lot of times it makes you feel better for helping, that is not helping the one that's struggling. And the other thing that would happen is people would come in and teach empathy. And again, empathy, Forbes even said it, #1 leadership skill, but it's an emotion. It's perspective taking. It's a lot of role playing. Like, what would you do if that happened? And how would you feel if you were in this person's shoes? And that's good too. It's super important to have empathy. But Dr. David DeSteno, who we're working with, will challenge us then. What are you going to do when you feel that, right? Comfort. You cannot comfort someone without connecting with them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be comforting them. So it's this great skill, very resilient, strength together, that is an automatic connector. It's not random. It's not an emotion. It's an activator of connection. And it cultivates. Over the last couple of years, we've asked people, when you feel comforted by someone, when you feel safe in their care, what comes out. And these are all weighted on what they said. Belonging, validation, trust, relationships together. Get more courage because you have to break through that awkwardness. It gives you hope and strength, which was exactly the definition of the word comfort. So let's talk about, here is one warehouse at Sandy Hook. So I spent 5 years going each week into the school at Sandy Hook, and people cared so deeply for that community. Everybody wanted to help. But look what happened. Everybody sent things. Hundreds of thousands of well-intentioned people sent things to that town, wanting to help, thinking if I send a little toy pickup truck, it's going to go to a family that lost a child. But then that's what everybody did. And so it took this community tens of thousands of hours, hundreds of volunteers over the course of years to repackage all of these. 67,000 teddy bears were sent to a town that only had 20,000 people in it. So sometimes our well intentions don't actually end up helping. It actually added a huge burden to this town. And so why aren't we actually connecting with those that are suffering the most and instead sending things? It's awkward. That's it. A lot of people really don't know what to say and do. They care, but don't know how to show it. So we're calling this the awkward zone, that place where you want to help someone struggling, but you have no idea what to say or do. So a lot of times you'll try something that may or may not work. Or other times you'll simply avoid it. So first, we're going to have a little fun. And I don't know how many of you have dogs, but who is never awkward? And if you actually watch, there's some of the best modelers of care and comfort out there are our dogs. And I witnessed this working with comfort dogs into some of these tragic hit areas. And this is what I learned. Number one, they will always recognize when you're hurting. Now, most people rate themselves high in recognizing people that are hurting, maybe not always following through on it though. So dogs intuitively know, they look, they care, and they act on that. Dogs put us first all the time. If you ever have a dog and you walk in the door, they're not on their phones. They're not watching Netflix. They're never too busy. They're so happy to see you. They listen. They're the world's best listeners. They don't give advice back. They don't talk back. They don't share what you said with someone else. One of my favorite ones, they don't talk. Dogs are the best at just being present. And if we can just remember these simple things, if we could all just be more like our dogs, the world would be such a better place. You know, they show up, they bring people together. Dogs are the best uniters on the planet. And you know what? They're wired to do this. And the thing is, we are wired the same. They're wired relationally. We are wired relational. The great thing about a dog is they only have the mind of a 2 to 3 year old human. Isn't that awesome? So if we would keep a 2 to 3 year old brain, we'd be a lot more like dogs. What happens is our brains develop and our brains kind of take over. Dogs are all heart, and heart is what we need to focus more on. So what stops us? All right, so I know you guys got your surveys. And in those surveys or the assessments, you went through and talked about or answered the questions. And we're going to focus right now on this awkward zone. So if you have your assessment there and you want to turn to page, I think it's page 5 where the awkward zone is. We're going to dive into what is it that stops people. We're going to look at 2 areas. First is the overall barrier. So first of all is just, how is your mindset if you hear of someone struggling? Let's say you have a member of a team who lost their dad, or let's say someone else is really struggling with their mental health. What will happen is you have one of 2 mindsets. The first mindset are those that are just ill-equipped. They allow awkwardness, fear, regret, and insecurity interfere with acting. They care but don't know what to say and do. Another group will have the tendency to shy away from it and say, it's not my place to step in. Somebody else can do this better. I'm not equipped to do that. And so each of these groups, it doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong answer. A lot of times it's cultural. If you were raised to say, you can handle this on your own, and you think you can handle your own problems, then you don't think people need your help. You think you have to solve it yourself and someone else needs to solve it themselves. And that's very true. Did a research study with inner city kids from New York last year. Very, very prevalent. But those are barriers to care. So let's now talk about, even if whatever that initial mindset is, the next layer down is that time, and it happens to all of you. You run into someone in the elevator, or you're in the supermarket and you run into someone in the aisle that lost their job, got a divorce, lost their spouse, or something else. And you are deer in the headlights. You're not quite sure how to respond. Two groups of people here. One is the fixer. I'm a fixer. You just jump in and you just start talking, or you try to cheer them up, or you try to give them advice, right? You just try to do something. And the other ones are the avoiders. Like, I am not touching that. I'm leaving that elephant smack dab in the middle of the room. I'm not going to bring it up. I'm not going to talk about it. And so again, these are all just barrier behaviors that can be overcome. And the great thing about a behavior, it's not a personality trait. So if you go like with Myers-Briggs or something, and you give them these, personality traits, that's how you're wired. These are behaviors that can be changed. So if you have your comfort profile that you got, we're going to focus on just two quick areas here. And I'm going to first show you, when we look at our barrier behaviors, how do other people answer theirs? How are they ranked? A lot of people don't think it's their business or their place to step in the situation. That ranks very, very high. Also, what ranks very, very high is it's awkward. I'm afraid, and someone else can do this better, right? So let's look about that. That's a deflector. That's someone that doesn't know what to do, and a deflector. And again, nothing wrong with that. We just kind of have to understand where our behaviors are. So now what we're going to do is, if you are on page 5, I want you to focus on this answer barriers to comfort here. And there's 3. You're going to look at your top 3. This one here is, it's awkward, it's fear, and I've done all I can to help. And so if you think about that, if you think about those 3, why are they even barriers? Why is it a barrier to be afraid? Why is it a barrier to be awkward? I want you to think about that for a second. And then, are you more of a deflector, or are you just someone that really just needs to know, just tell me what to say and do, and I'm going to do it? So if you look on the first pages of your assessment, you don't need to do that now, but under your comfort profile, that's going to give you some clue. What you're good at, do that. And then otherwise, secondly, I should say, if you find that you more think like, it's not my place to step in, or somebody else can do this better, think about how you would feel if no one cared for you, and start perspective taking a little bit on that. We dive much deeper into this in our workshops and trainings. I really don't have a lot of time to go over it today at all, other than to create an awareness, because there are tips and tools for each of these barriers. There's ways to overcome these barriers. But in the number 1, just let's make it clear on this little chat today, it is always your place to show care. It is always critically important to validate someone's pain. And again, you don't have to go so deep. You're not their counselor. You don't have to solve everything. Think of a dog. It doesn't even talk, but you can recognize that someone's struggling. And there's all sorts of things you can do there. Drop off a coffee, send a text, pop an email. I see you if you ever want to talk. It is always your place to show care. So that is number 1. And leaders of tomorrow are going to have to need to know how to show it. So let's talk about now we respond. Okay, now we're in the supermarket or in the elevator and we run into someone that's gone through something tragic and we don't know what to do and say. The number one thing here is I'll tell them, let me know how I can help without having anything specific in mind. We all do that. It's very common. That is a little bit of an avoidance, but it's also just someone that doesn't know what to do. I'll try to cheer them up. That is definitely a fixer. I will try to help them by telling them what helped me. Definitely a fixer. I'll make small talk, but avoid the subject because I don't want to upset them. That's an avoider. So again, now let's go to your awkward zone profile and we're going to look up here at the unexpected scenario. And your top 3 answers there are going to give you a flavor if you're someone that is more an avoider or if you are more a fixer. And if you know that you're a fixer, guess what? You're just going to take a breath and not jump in. And remember these behaviors of a dog. Just be present, put them first. Don't talk, right? Or if you're an avoider, you do have to show that you care. Bring up the elephant in the room, ask them and make sure you show that. So very high level in something that we could talk for days about. But the whole point of the awkward zone, my friends, is that these are only behaviors that can change. And so many times people want to help, but they don't. So understanding what's stopping you is the first step in understanding what we can do. And so how do we care? If you did your personal profile, your comfort zone is a great thing to focus on. But right now, the need is so great. January Boston University survey, and this is on campuses, but it's also holds true in the workplace. Believe that people's mental health has worsened or significantly worsened during this pandemic stage. And 73% want training to know how to give support. 73%. So again, why are we here? We are here because people need to know this and they want to know it. And the other thing we want to focus on is, in the past couple decades, and again, this is just the way it's gone. So I want to talk you through this. There's been a huge focus on self-care, and that's needed and it's good. We're learning how to self-regulate our emotions, to understand our emotions, to feel our emotions, to talk about our emotions. We're learning how to be more mindful, how to meditate, to breathe better, and to regulate our emotions. And so that's all very good, but we have to go beyond that. It's just like we have to go beyond kindness. There's extra steps we need to take if we're going to mend our hurting world. So inward focus is critical, but outward focus is almost more critical. Clinicians will tell you that inward focus will only work if you're connected outward. Dr. Arthur Evans said the number one thing is social connectedness. If we're not connected socially outward, inward focus can't work because our minds will just play over and over in our heads. We have to have that. Remember that oxytocin, and that is triggered, you need to go talk to someone. So in order to create cultures of care and connectedness, we have to focus on caring for others. So the way that the skill of comfort works is it goes beyond these first 3 steps. If you look at these first 3 steps over here, this is typically what emotional learning is. You have awareness, you put yourself in others' shoes, and you plan what you can do. If you stop there, that's very well intentioned, but you haven't done anything. The great thing about the skill of comfort is this required connection that you basically then have to connect with this person, watch them, observe what they need, reflect back on not only how it helped them, but it helped you. The thing about caring for others, and I know that you know this, is that when you care for someone, you get the best self-care back every time. It's how we're wired because oxytocin is released, which is why Dr. Arthur Evans said we need social connectedness. And the more that we do that over and over and over is how we gain more empathy, how we gain deeper relationships, and how we're more socially well-adjusted. So where do we go? I want you to consider every day when you walk out the door that you face 3 different doors you can walk through. And again, learning how to care is a lifestyle choice. It's a lifestyle choice, just like eating well or caring for your body. We have to care for others. So door number 1, we are going to call this the do nothing door. So if you go through door number 1, your blinders are on each day. You are focused so much on your own stuff that you have no time to focus on anybody else. And so please don't go through door number 1. Door number 2, we're going to call the one and done door. Now, door number 2 is way better than door number 1. Let's get that straight. But door number 2 is not going to result in long-term connection. Door number 2 is sending a teddy bear to Sandy Hook. Door number 2 is giving relief efforts to a hurricane. Door number 2 is giving your friend a call after she went through a breakup, but never following up again. So door number 2, always better than door number 1, but will not result in social connectedness. Door number 3, we're going to call the comfort on door. Door number 3, when you walk out the door in the morning, your eyes are open. Your eyes are open to everyone around you that's struggling. You keep track of who is having surgeries or what is going on with someone's life, and you just follow up. They are so many little actions. And I think so many times what happens is we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to do the big thing. And the point is, caring for each other is never about the big thing. And I'll tell you how I learned this. I've been going into Sandy Hook every week for 5 years. And when I had to leave Sandy Hook to move down here to the Washington, D.C. area, I was leaving behind some of the best friends that I had ever made in my life. But yet all I did was show up for them while they were working every day. We didn't have all of this time to talk. It was because I showed up and I cared again and again and again and again. And then what happens is there is that time that they invite you to lunch, or there is that time that there's a graduation and all of a sudden you're invited, because you become a trusted friend simply because you're checking in on them. That's it. So I want you to think about this. It's the marble jar. Imagine people on your team, people in your life are empty jars. And every single time you show a little act of caring for them, one-to-one care, this is not random, you put a marble in their jar. Lots of texts, dropping off their favorite coffee, asking if they want to go for a walk. Look on your action items on your comfort zone. I'm going to give you some clues here. And you just do these over and over again for all the time to come. And it's never too much. And all of a sudden you learn to take the pressure off yourself that you have to do this massive thing. And you learn to do what you like to show that you care. So here's a little tip for you. One of the things that's in the book. I did write a book. I was super, super lucky to have a collaborator from Time Magazine, Sky Quinn, who actually does the Time Magazine covers, and she does a lot of their bookazines. And so the book that we developed is not a word book. It has all sorts of tips and tools and illustrations and graphs and charts. And this is something like what's in the book. So do your words and actions pass the pause filter test? So I want you just to think about this before you say or do anything. Do you pass this test? Number 1, are you removing all your distractions and emotionally available? P, are you present? A, are you giving advice when they didn't ask for it? Almost always advice is bad. So stop yourself from giving advice. Third is unloading. Are you unloading your own problems on someone instead of letting them share theirs? Next is stay with the mood. A lot of barriers are people trying to cheer someone up. This is what happens is when there are people that are down, people want to cheer them up. And then sometimes when people are in a good place, but they're still going through a tough time, someone will pull them down. So you always want to stay with the mood. And then E is emphasis, making sure the emphasis is on the other person and not yourself, because we all like to talk about ourselves. So it's super easy to take the focus back on yourself. How we do this in the workplace, we do assess. First of all, we do this anonymous pre-assessment, that or anonymous survey that will give a temperature read of what is going on in your organization. How do people feel cared for? Where do they feel cared for? Where do they not feel cared for? In general, other things about the temperature of care in your organization. Then, in order for people to understand why you're investing in the skill, we go through a presentation or a webinar similar to what this is right now. And then we equip. We take those assessments that you have and we actually put them into action. We help you understand exactly how to get through those barriers and how to care for those around you through workshops or studies or various methods. And the last thing we do is we cultivate to keep that culture going. We will certify organizational trainers to be within your company that will actually then take the lead on making sure that the organization itself is going beyond just a crisis response. Because I'll tell you what happens. It's not a matter of if, but when something happens in the organization. A crisis response is typically a very legalistic check the box, 24, 36, 72 hours to make sure legally and structurally everyone is cared for. And then the human resource department and the employee assistance program will take care of those closest to the tragedy. To have a culture of care, there needs to be a long-term care response. And that's what we can train someone within an organization that will know how to make sure over time, those that have been, very many sometimes are traumatized. A lot of times if it's piled on, you have people that have dealt with something before that now have been triggered again, that they need to be cared for. So it's very important to create this culture and to cultivate that ongoing. And so that's how we do it. I think I mentioned we had this amazing opportunity through the New York Suicide Prevention Center to do a research study this past spring. And when you care for others, what did we find? Depression, decrease in depression, decrease in loneliness, increase in compassion for self, increase in compassion for others. They learned how to be better listeners, how to care for others, 100% unanimous support in participants and staff. And so with that, I just want you to know, you can reach me at jen@inspiringcomfort.com, on Facebook, Inspiring Comfort, or LinkedIn, find me on Jen Marr. Go to the website, inspiringcomfort.com, where you can see the book or just reach out if you have any questions. So with that, I am going to stop my share and open up the floor for questions.
So just as a reminder, if you do have a question and you would like to have a comment, if you'll raise your hand, I will happily give you the microphone so you can speak instead of just typing into chat. So wonderful. I have Sandra Orr. Sandra, I have given you the microphone. You'll need to unmute yourself in order to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Jen, and hello, everyone on the line. Jen's a little familiar to me. We've certainly met and worked together before on a couple of different areas. And I was just going to ask her, for the good of the group, if you have supported or worked with any other federal organizations to date, and if so, what has that looked like?
Yeah, so far, Sandra and I worked on a panel for federal coaches. I have also worked with the Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor and was just asked to present with the White House Leadership Development Program next week on a program developing cultures of care in our pandemic weary workforce. So again, I am not from Washington, D.C., don't have much of a network here, but it is growing quickly, and would love to get to know anybody else that wants to know more about what we're doing. I'm so excited that the White House Leadership Development is understanding that leaders of tomorrow have to be able to show care.
Absolutely. I'm excited to hear that. I remember you sharing that, and thanks for sharing that with the group.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra. Anyone else? All right, Trina.
All right, thank you. Jen, thank you for this presentation. I have several questions, but the one burning question on my mind is, you talked about the avoider versus the fixer. Do you find that fixers burn out quicker than avoiders because they're always trying to help or fix things?
Well, that's a good question. I got to be honest, Trina, I don't know that we've ever taken it deep into that level. There's so many ways you could look at this data, and a fixer is maybe sometimes could be considered more of an extrovert. An avoider might be more of an introvert. Could it then hold true? I don't know, maybe. I can't say. I honestly can't say. I've never looked at it that way, but I do know that, sometimes people do get burnt out, especially circumstantial, I think would be a better way to look at it, because, over these past 18 months, if you've had people that you've had to care for on top of being at home, plus your kids are having school and that's in your house, the caregiver role is almost so overwhelming that it can burn you out. We've worked with people that have said they've answered this assessment entirely differently than they would have before COVID. And that, I think, sometimes that overwhelming nature that we saw, what happens when you have so much stress, you will avoid relationships and you will isolate. And that definitely does happen. And so that's why it's so critical to know that not only do we have to care for others, but we have to make sure others are caring for us. And so we hear a lot about, if you're burdened or whatever, make sure you have, you care for yourself. And sometimes people, that in and of itself is something you want to be careful to say, because they know they need to, but they can't help it. The main thing is to help care for them and let others help care for you. It is in that connection that is so critical. And I would challenge anyone, if you're feeling burdened, to just pick 4 friends that you know, whether childhood friends or whatever, and just send them a text and just say, my gosh, this past 6 months have really been hard. How about you? What's going on in your life? And all of a sudden, you're going to have great conversations and you get some of that out, which is so critical. It is holding everything in sometimes that really hurts our own emotional well-being. Does that make sense, Trina?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Trina. Anyone else? Happy to give you the microphone. Well, while we're waiting for others, I just wanted to step in and say that I am one of those who goes through door number 2 quite frequently. So it was interesting I thought I was doing a lot of caring, moving through that door and just, reaching out with a small token or something that I thought might just cheer the person up. But I hadn't really thought about the follow-up after that. I've had a friend of mine who lost her, we're speaking of dogs, who lost her pet after 13 years. And they're in Australia when they're in lockdown. So they are really struggling because they've had this great loss. And I've reached out a couple of times just to say, how are you doing? And yeah, I recall whenever I lost my pet, how much it meant to me for others to reach out, but I haven't followed up in a while. So I'm thinking that it's time for me to step through that door number 3 and really give them some outreach and maybe set up a video chat call, because that's something that I haven't done in a while. So thank you for reminding us that there are other door options there.
Oh my gosh. And it doesn't have to be hard. I think that's the one thing I learned is my favorite thing is texting, and not just texting words. It's like, those little GIFs, like GIFs or whatever you call them. And they're like picture memes or whatever. And sometimes I'll just pick a couple funny ones and I'll send them to someone and just say, how's today going? And it's amazing how much people appreciate you just thinking of them. And it doesn't have to be a real heavy, like, I'm thinking of you today. It can be uplifting, and it can be, or an emoji or something. It's just showing little acts of care again and again. And I could tell you time and time again that if somebody just does that, like I have a friend that had kind of an old friend that lost a 16-year-old son. It was really very tragic. And so she had read the book and she said, that's what I did. I just started sending a text each week. And she said within 2 months, she was one of that person's most trusted friends because she was the only one that stayed in touch. And that's how easy it is. It's not, and it's the same for employees. It's the same for anything. You don't have to put yourself out there. You don't have to put this. A lot of people feel like if I'm going to care for someone, I'm taking this big burden on myself. It is not. It is actually, you almost get some of your own burden taken off. It's completely the opposite. And so just by simply dropping something off, and that's why if you did your assessment, like in your, if you love to play games, like someone told me that the whole way he got through his chemo treatment was a neighbor asked to play chess once a week. It was the highlight of his week, right? Or anything on that list can be used. If you love to shop, you could just text somebody, hey, I'm at the store, what can I grab you? Or I'm grabbing you, bowl of fruit. When people are struggling, nutritious food is one of the hardest things to come by because people will always lean on pastas and fried foods and things like that. So anything like that, just little things over and over again, and simple.
Wonderful. Well, Sandra has another question for you, or an opportunity. So Sandra, you are up. You'll just need to unmute.
Thanks, Shanda. And Jen, I wanted to say that slide that you shared from Sandy Hook, I thought was just, it was just so powerful. And when you talked about the statistics and the numbers, I've often wondered when you see these memorials on the side of the street or wherever they are, when people have all these candles and teddy bears and flowers, I've always been curious about that, right? And when you talked about just the outpouring of what people thought was some kind of help or emotion, and just the sheer volume compared to the actual residents, and then how that created a burden, I thought that really was definitely food for thought for a lot of us when we're kind of thinking through actions that we think may be helpful. So that was just such a powerful example for us to be reflective and think differently. In addition to the list that you shared, I mean, those things were so simple and so obvious sometimes, but they don't always occur to us. So thank you for both of those, sharing your Sandy Hook experience, kind of showing us how that can be overwhelming and actually a burden, which I think many of us have never considered. And then for even just giving us the simple ideas that sometimes just don't come to mind when we're trying to help.
Yeah, and there are so many ideas that we couldn't even list them all. People, what they say they will do for a friend that's struggling. And it usually is just understanding what they need and then what you love to do. And that warehouse for Sandy Hook, by the way, was just one of like 4. It was overwhelming. I was in the school and just stuff would be getting delivered over and over and over. And it was actually frustrating. It was actually frustrating for everyone on the ground. And so it's random acts of kindness gone wrong. It's empathy misapplied. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Sandra, for your thoughtful comments. Anyone else have anything for Jen? We have just a few more minutes and then we're going to move into our announcements. Yes, Trina.
Okay, so I had the opportunity to talk with Jen, and I know about the name Pause to Comfort. Jen, can you talk a little bit about your book as far as why is the name Pause for Comfort?
Yeah, it's a good question. And thank you for asking that. Well, as I had alluded to, I worked for 5 solid years in crisis response, working with comfort dogs and literally taking comfort dogs into crisis response settings. And I learned 2 things. Number 1, dogs knew exactly what to do. And number 2, humans didn't. And I watched for 5 years. I mean, it was never my goal to have this company. It was never my goal to do this. But my background prior to that had been in business development. I had just taken some years off to raise my daughters, and we lived in a town adjacent to Sandy Hook, and I got involved with this team. And my business development mind went to work. I said, there has to be a better way. So when I made the book, it was kind of two things. Number one, pause. Like, we do have to slow down, like that pause filter I showed. But secondly, it was dogs that led me to comfort. It was kind of the two meanings. But actually, we found that the dog on the cover and the title is very confusing. And when we do a reprint, we will probably change that title and not have a dog on the cover anymore. People think it's a book about dogs, but it's not. But thank you for asking, Trina.
Thank you, Trina.
Thank you, Sandra. Sandra, for introducing you to us, and Jen for being with us today and explaining all that. And I just want to, we were having a conversation about dogs, and I was sharing with Shanda and Jen that my husband and I are I guess, grand dog sitting my son's dog. And he has brought so much comfort in our house. He's changed our attitude within the last few days. So I do understand the dogs do bring you comfort. So thank you for sharing. But I can't keep them full time. No, that's a job by itself. So thank you.
Thanks. Some of the easiest lessons to remember.
Perfect. We have time for just one more question. If anyone has would like to raise their hand, I'm happy to give you the microphone. I'm trying to keep track here. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jen, for your presentation today. Like I said, it did give me an opportunity to pause, P-A-U-S-E. I did recognize some of the elements in myself, and I did do the assessment. So I'm interested to dive a little deeper into my results there. I did a quick review, and so today's discussion helped me do a little bit more of a review. We're going to move over, and I'm going to share my screen real quick. We're going to do a couple of announcements. So I appreciate if you guys are able to stay on. And let me just give you, here we go. All right. Okay, hopefully you can see the screen there. And we have, if you don't mind, we would love to have your feedback. We do have the form here, and I am going to share also on the chat. Actually, Chris, if you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat the form link so everyone can have that, I would appreciate it. If you take just a few moments and give us your feedback on today's presentation, that would be much appreciated. Also, we have our openings for our 2022 Annual Institute crew. We are looking for individuals to help us out at the Annual Institute. We're back live this year. So we're looking for a lot of, we have a lot of opportunities, both virtually and at the Annual Institute, both before the Annual Institute to prepare for it and during the Annual Institute. So benefits for volunteering there, gain new skills. We will help you develop ECQs for your resume for what you do with us for volunteering. You're definitely going to expand your network and strengthen the TOC community by volunteering. We do have program committee members, technology liaisons, and we do have a lot of ad hoc, like I said, preparation for AI. So you can get your hands dirty, dive in, get involved there. The Annual Institute page on our training officers website will give you more information, and you can always contact any one of us on the crew there that you see at institute@trainingofficers.org. We do have the call for proposals. So if you'd like to speak at the Annual Institute, like I said, we have both in-person sessions and we have live webinar options. The call for proposals are open until January 12th, 2022. So you can reach that from our Training Officers Consortium website and the Annual Institute area. And again, the contact for that would be institute@trainingofficers.org if you have any questions or would like additional information. We have a couple of opportunities for you to help us sponsor or partner with us for Training Officers Consortium. We have partnership opportunities for our year-long program on the left-hand side of the screen there. And you can see we moved from Friend all the way up to Diamond partnership opportunities. We do have sponsorship opportunities for our annual institute as well for booths and special events. We have an entire a book for that and a long list. So please feel free to contact us at institute@trainingofficers.org for more information about sponsoring the annual institute, and partners@trainingofficers.org for information about partnering with us for the year program. Don't miss our next event is coming up on November the 9th. We will be in person for the next event at City Club of Washington, D.C. The event will start at 11:30. We will have lunch from 11:30 to noonish, 12:15. We will start our live stream broadcast of the C-suite panel. So we're very excited to have these 4 wonderful individuals to join us to give us insight and inspiration on the topic of training and development. So please, please, please join us for that if you can. If you're a current registrant, you are already eligible, a current full program registrant. Those who are virtual registrants, you are welcome to join us. It is a $60 walk-in fee for anyone who's virtual or a non-registrant. This is our program year. We still have a lot going on, so we would love to see you. See, there's something happening every month, whether it be in person or a webinar or a community event. In May, we have our annual institute. We're bringing a lot of information and a lot of opportunities for you to connect with each other this year. We do have multiple registration opportunities for you. Full registration at $1,950. Group registration, if you have more than 3 people in your organization who would like to sign up, it's $1,650 per person for 3 or more. Virtual registration, which gets you everything that we do virtually, including our networking opportunities that we do virtually, is a $750. And then if you'd like to just join us for our annual institute, we have an annual institute only cost of $1,450. Great value, because any of the group, full, or institute only will get you not only the annual institute, but it also brings you lodging and meals along with the special events that we will be hosting. So wonderful value for your money there. Thank you very much for joining us today. And we look forward to having a full, amazing year with you. Please feel free to reach out to us or visit our trainingofficers.org for any additional information. I will stay on for just a few more moments. If you have any questions, please again do fill out that evaluation form if you have the opportunity. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you. I have to show you that he decided that he wanted to join me. So
your camera is turned off. Trina, just there you go. Oh, look at, hi, boss.
he heard you talking and knows he jumped up in the seat with me.
Too cute.